Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here, and I think this has been an exciting conference, and I'm excited to begin this next panel discussion. We are joined today by several esteemed scholars and practitioners, and first we have Monsignor Héctor Fabio Henao. He is a priest of the Archdiocese of Bogota. He recently became director of the Office for Relations between the Church and the Colombian State. For the previous 25 years, he was the director of the Episcopal Conference of Colombia's National Social Pastoral Secretariat and Caritas Colombia. He has participated in several national peace processes, including serving as past president and now the bishop's representative on the official National Council for Peace, Reconciliation, and Coexistence. We also have Myla Leguro. She is the technical advisor for social cohesion and church engagement at Catholic Relief Services in Mindanao in the Philippines. She has worked for Catholic Relief Services on Muslim-Christian dialogue and peace building for 3 decades, and is currently actively involved in promoting implementation of the Bangsamoro law, which creates autonomous regions in line with the 2014 agreement between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. We then have Bishop Jean-Bertin Nadonye Ndongo. He has been the Bishop of Lolo in the Democratic Republic of the Congo since 2015, and is chairman of the National Justice and Peace Commission of the National Episcopal Conference of the Congo. The Bishops' Conference has played a major role in promoting peace, including facilitating negotiations between the government and opposition parties in 2017 and 18, and organizing an unprecedented church effort to monitor the 2018 presidential elections. Bishop Ndanye previously served as general counselor of the Capuchin Friars Minor in Rome. We also have with us Paolo Impagliazzo. He is the Secretary General of the community of Sant'Egidio. Sant'Egidio was founded in Rome in 1968 and is a network of communities in more than 70 countries. Sant'Egidio is renowned for its work in facilitating peace accords, notably the 1992 Mozambique Peace Accord, and they have been involved most recently in the South Sudan peace talks and moderating those talks. Next, we have with us also my good friend Josefina Echavarría Álvarez. She is Associate Professor of the Practice at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, which is part of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. She directs the peace process, the Peace Accords Matrix, or PAM, which is the most comprehensive database and research program on intrastate peace accords since 1989. Her work includes leading a team of some 36 staff of the Colombia Barometer Initiative, which is the official monitor of implementation of the 2016 Colombia Peace Accord, and the first university to play such a role in a peace agreement. So I actually am going to start my discussions with Josefina. So Josefina, you study peace accords around the world, but when you talk about peace processes, what do you have in mind? And what are some of the key factors that make for a successful peace processes? And what are some of the factors that lead peace processes to fail?
Thank you, Susan, very much for your question. And thank you everyone for being with us today. I'm really excited to participate in this conference that I have been following for the past couple of days. So your question is actually quite comprehensive. It includes like 3 main parts. And I will try to be brief to allow my esteemed colleagues to also participate in this panel. So, you know, the Peace Accords Matrix, we studied formal process of negotiations that lead to peace accords. So we studied those types of negotiations that actually lead to a text in which we have a government and an illegal arms organization coming together to end the war. That already gives us a few clues about what kind of peace processes we're dealing with in this particular instance. So one of them is that of course, the government and that illegal arms organization are not equal. This is not a confrontation between a country X and a country Y, but this is a confrontation between a government that is sitting at home, that has an administration, a bureaucracy, etc., and an illegal arms organization. So this tends to normally have very important implication for power dynamics at the negotiation table, but also afterwards in the implementation phase. This is one of the important aspects of why actors, religious actors such as the church, of course, but also the international community are so important to support the peace accord in negotiation and implementation phase. The second characteristic is that in this particular case, these peace processes are, speaking about a war that has taken place at home for both of the fighting conflict parties. This means that they both feel that they share a territory. They very often share a history, even if it's a divided history, for example, of ethnic identities. It is shared in that sense. And very often, once the illegal armed groups demobilize, they stay in the same territory. So this already should give us a lot of good ideas about what does a successful peace process look like, and is one that from the moment of negotiation is already advancing and is already imagining the implementation phase, and that is also thinking about how to create the best conditions, not only to end the war, but to create sustainable peace in a way that the different groups can live together in the future. So I think that these two factors of successful peace accord negotiation and implementation are important. And a third one, of course, is the accompaniment of the international community. The clearer we are able to write in the peace accords the provisions, the commitments, who is responsible, what is the time frame, how are we going to finance a particular commitment in the peace accord, and if we're able to include the international community with its resources, with its interests, accompanying specific parts of the implementation process, what we have seen is that politically and financially, this is quite key to make the peace process successful, because the peace process is not successful by only, and this is an amazing achievement in most of the cases, by not only signing the peace accord or agreeing upon a text, but the real success of the peace process is in the implementation phase. It is when we are able to bring those promises to enact them in real life, when people that are not only those that participated in the war, but the victims, civil society, social movements, etc., who suffer the war either directly or indirectly, when they benefit from the accord that was reached at the negotiation table. And
So,
this,
let me
sorry.
ask. No, thank you. This is great. So, as you're explaining, the success is really related to the implementation phase. But could you talk a little bit about before you get to the implementation, as you're going through a peace process, and obviously conflicts are different around the world. There might be some similarities, access or limited resources, things like that. But how does religion play a role? And is that something that is important?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that one of the most important aspects that we have seen really throughout the world, because we study over 30 peace agreements implementation processes, is that one of the keys during the negotiation phase is to be inclusive. Inclusive, it has multiple connotations. It is inclusive, a peace process is inclusive because it brings to the table a lot of the voices of different groups who have experienced the war differently and therefore will have different roles in peace building. And here we see religious actors playing various roles, both because often they are part of the confrontations or they have been an element in the confrontation, and therefore they will have a very important role in peace building. We have also seen how many religious actors enjoy legitimacy among different armed groups, and therefore they have traditionally played the role of facilitators and negotiators, even without a formal peace agreement or a peace negotiation phase. So what we want to do is make sure that when we conceive of peace building, we are able to map this landscape and understand how religion as a factor has played a role, whether positive or negatively, many times both throughout history, in order to understand what are the underlying causes of the conflict and bring them during the negotiation tables, either to provide and help us gain credibility, which is one of their main roles, but also kind of like safeguard that negotiation space so that those who are participating, those who are really making a big bet in terms of their armies, in terms of their legacies, etc., have the trust in the negotiation process that can be provided by a third party. So this is what we have seen around the world, that the religious actors and the church is really excellent when it assumes that third party role in order to help different political organizations, social movements, different groups of interest come together to allow that space to really, you know, have a conversation, have a dialogue about how to reduce violence and how to build sustainable peace that is more equal, where we have better opportunities for all.
Thank you very much. Let me ask some of the rest of you on the panel. Do you agree with Josefina's assessment of the factors that are most important in ensuring successful peace processes? Maybe we can turn to you, Bishop Héctor.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. I agree totally with Josefina. I would like to stress three different particular points we learned during the negotiation in Colombia. Before the implementation had been critical, the issue of communication between the negotiation table and the population in general. In fact, during the plebiscite, most of the people vote against the negotiation because they didn't have enough information, they didn't have enough contact with the negotiators in Havana. And seems to be that was very far away from Colombia. That we learned that a lot. The second point we learned is that it's quite important to listen to the voice of the victims during the process, to include the victims. In fact, in Colombia, the government and FARC, they decided to invite some delegation of different group of victims from the state, victims from the guerrillas, victims from the other illegal groups, to give a witness in front of the table. And that was very powerful to change the negotiation process. They shift a lot the process because at that moment, everything was blocked, speaking about who was the victims or the perpetrators, but when the real victims they came to the table, that was very helpful to go forward. And the last point I would like to stress is related to justice. Justice is a critical issue. It's a very, very difficult issue. And in particular, when we speak about transitional justice and restorative justice, we must think a little bit, we must think very clear about how to engage the whole population on that, how to inform about the consequences, etc., for the populations, because many people don't understand very well what means transitional justice. That points are important to make sustainable the process. But in general, I agree with totally with Josefina, just to add that points we learn a lot about. And finally, something about the role of the different religious leaders. Religious leaders can play a very important role. In particular, when we support from the territories, from the regions affected by the confrontation, we support the population, we build bridges between the population and the negotiations, and also when we give more information to them about what the government, the guerrilla are negotiating in each of the stage of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop. Let me bring in Bishop Jean-Bertin. Welcome. We've had, with all of the moving parts and people in so many places, I'm so pleased that you could join us. I was asking the other panelists about successful peace processes and what makes them successful. You have been involved, of course, not only in sort of peace, but in actually kind of monitoring presidential elections and bringing people to the table, as Reverend Héctor has mentioned how important that is. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as the important role of the church in peace processes, or in the work that you have been engaged in the DRC? I think you're on mute. Bishop Jean-Bertin, je crois que vous êtes toujours sur silence.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So I want to say that thank you for this question, and also about this situation in our country, DRC. The church has a big power only not for the power for the country, but for the people, because we can have many church in the world, in our country, a countryside country. So I can say this. So the people in this country have who can say the faith for church, because they know in our countryside we can have the church, we can have also the priest and the catechist. It work in this country, and if we are going in the country countryside, we can see all the school only for the church, and we know if we see some people is work for the development, or for the peace, or for the growing for the people only in the Catholic Church. So we have also many schools in the country, and for this the political man know for that, for the Catholic Church we pressing only the gospel for the gospel. So for the gospel about the peace in the world. So we know also what the people is suffering in the country. We do not have the way, we have not the school, we have also not many things. So the political man, we want only we have the power when we have the election. We go only to the country to have only this situation. So when the bishops in the country, Senko, you have the meeting, we speak also about all the situation in our country. And we have in diocese, each diocese, we have the commission for the justice and peace, all the commission. And we have also in the Paris, the commission for justice and peace, to help the people. They know what they want to do. So for us, it's not only for the bishop or for the priest, but for all people in our country, and also the teacher in the schools, the doctor in the hospital, and everything. The last time we have the meeting with the church, Protestant church. We have all the dialogue with them together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So clearly we're sticking with the theme of communication being very important. Let me ask Myla, because you have been involved in dialogue between the church or with the church and Muslim groups in the Philippines. Does that make any difference in terms of the approach that the Catholic Church approaches justice, peace, reconciliation based on the principles of the Catholic Church, whereas other religions and Bishop Jean Martin is also working with other religious communities, even though Christian communities? Does that make a difference in the approach or what might lead to a successful peace process? Or are there particular challenges that need to be addressed? I know that's a bit loaded, a lot of questions in there.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you so far for what has been shared. Just to really start by affirming what Josefina is saying, that for a peace process to be successful, inclusion is a key part of that. And this is also our experience. And so when we talk about the conflict in Mindanao, certainly it has a religious dimension and component and flavor, although we are saying that it's really a complex issue of multi-layered issue in relation to a combination of factors. There's land dispossession, service deficiencies, deep-seated and widespread prejudices across among Muslim, Christians, and indigenous groups. The parties of the peace talks are actually the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which identifies as Muslim, and government, which is identified as a dominant Christian majority. So even in that aspect, the negotiation already reflects, or already in a sense reflect the religious flavor and dimension. So in essence, the approach that we have always been taking in relation to the work that we do, both for the informal process but also with the formal, how we're accompanying it, is really to take into consideration how we are actually engaging each other as people of different identities, because certainly it's really part of the conflict narrative. So in terms of the approach, we do a lot of interreligious peace building work. So when we say interreligious peace building, we really draw on, recognize first that religion has been used actually to divide people, but at the same time, you also recognize that religions, whether we're Christians or Muslims or indigenous, we can actually harness that as a resource for peace. So that's where we start to really look at religion as a way to connect, to communicate, but also to work out all the difficult issues such as self-determination, governance, how do we address land conflict issues. So a key part of the work that we do is really engaging across religious identities. So our church leaders, Catholic church leaders, work alongside Muslim religious leaders, traditional leaders of the indigenous communities. So it's a key part of the approach in terms of how we can work together so that we are able to actually connect, look at common grounds, but at the same time, we do not ignore the differences, but work out through these differences, especially now that we're in the stage where we're implementing. It's already, it has been signed, so we're in the stage of implementation. The particularities of the engagement now is making sure that the Bangsamoro, which identifies as Muslims, do not exclude in the implementation of the peace accords the participation of now the minority Christians and the minority indigenous group. So it's a continuing engagement of how civil society actors, together with the multi-faith religious leaders, to ensure that we sustain that engagement, even in the implementation.
That's very helpful. So in doing that, do you continue to engage the different groups and constantly bring people in, or is it sort of locked in once the agreement is signed?
It's never locked in. So I was actually going to suggest also that a key part of ensuring that a peace process will succeed is to ensure that we actually install, develop, establish mechanisms in the community together with the multi-faith communities to address emerging conflicts that come out of the implementation of the peace stipulations. So there are many emerging conflicts now that we're actually encountering, such as land dispossession is continuing. There's a lot of expectations that are not met because they're not part of the peace dividend. So a key part of the work that we do in terms of accompaniment is to work together as Muslim, Christians, and indigenous so that we're able to continue addressing the concerns to ensure that whatever is stipulated in the peace agreement, there's actually concrete implementation or even concrete benefits that will actually redound to the conflict-affected communities. So it's a continuing negotiation, actually.
So this brings me to a perfect point to bring in Paolo. Paolo, with Sant'Egidio, it is a group of lay Catholics and not a formal arm of the Catholic Church. And yet, unlike Catholic Relief Services, which has a formal link to the Catholic bishops, that is not the case with Sant'Egidio, and yet you work very closely with the church and are very much in line with the church. Is that a choice of Sant'Egidio, or do you feel it as a resource for you, or can it be a hindrance at times? How does that work for Sant'Egidio, and maybe in particular in the peace process in South Sudan?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to, very glad for the invitation. Yeah, we are recognized, the community of Sant'Egidio, of course, is recognized by the Holy See as a public lay association. So, of course, we are part of the new movement recognized by the Holy See, but we are fully independent. In our experience, of course, we share our initiative for peace with the Vatican diplomacy and with Pope Francis, or the Pope, the other popes that were before Pope Francis, and we will continue like that. Of course, we are independent, and but we are Christians and we are believers. That is perceived by different countries and different organizations as a plus, let me say. Going back to what we were discussing at the beginning, I believe religion is really a key, can play a key role in different conflict zones. In the experience of Sant'Egidio, for example, we led the transition in Niger. Niger is a Muslim country, but as a Christian community, we were perceived as believers in a country of believers, so really trustable.
So even in a country that is largely Muslim, yeah. The country's negotiators could trust, even if it were Christians. Is it because you're believers, or is it because the role of the church is seen as so important?
Yeah, both of them. Let me add the third point, the third aspect. So the church, of course, as mentioned by Bishop, it's really very important because the church is providing services to everybody, health service, education, and many other things. So really trustable. also in Muslim-dominated country. Second point is that, as I told you before, we are believers, so they feel more comfortable with believers instead of maybe people that are not so close to religion. And this is something really very important. Then, of course, the connection with the churches, it's also really very important. And of course, the Church, Catholic Church, is an institution recognized worldwide as a serious one, trustable one, although with if there are Muslims that see the Catholic Church as a trustable institution. Let me give you an example to add something what Myla was saying. Sant'Egidio was involved in the Mindanao peace process through the Muhammadiyah. Muhammadiyah is a Muslim brother in Indonesian Muslim Brotherhood. And because of the interfaith dialogue that we are doing in Sant'Egidio, convening in the spirit of Assisi every year a meeting of different religion leaders. So the Muhammadiyah asked us to be part of the Mindanao Peace Process Commission. So we were there, but we were invited not by the Catholic Church in Mindanao or the government in Mindanao, but through a Muslim Brotherhood Muhammadiyah from Indonesia. So just to stress how the believers are perceived as a positive role, could perceive as with a positive role by other believers in different situations.
That's very helpful. Josefina, would you like to jump in? I see you nodding. And I think this interreligious dialogue is very important, and all of you are doing it in different ways and adding different components based on the regions that you're working in. Josefina, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I feel that many of the things that you have all been saying so far really resonate very well with me, because we're about to have the launch of the final report of the Truth Commission in Colombia. And I think that these are those like pivotal moments in a peace process, in a peace building process that is much larger than the negotiation phase, right? That takes decades. And I always see that these are the moments in which we're not only looking at the past, we're not only looking at the narratives of what happened to us during the war, what did we do to each other, but I see this as an amazing opportunity for religious actors, as Paolo was saying, not necessarily from one denomination, but just to have spiritual communities come together and accompany the civil society and especially the victims in this process of truth telling and truth sharing, because it's difficult, it's really hard. And I do believe that there is a moment in which truth requires also a lot of compassion in order for it to really, not to really, or to be the most fruitful towards rebuilding relationships with the goal of reconciliation. And this is why I also think that what Monsignor Héctor Fabio was saying before is so important to us in Colombia, and is always to remind ourselves that truth always comes or should come accompanied by justice. And I do think that the church and religious leaders and religious actors play a crucial role here that the government cannot play, the international community cannot play, because we can't provide that space there. So I think that as we are entering this new phase in Colombia, I do believe that this conversation is quite crucial for all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to turn to Monsignor, but let me go to Paolo first.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I would like to stress something more on this interreligious. I would like to propose the example of the 3 saints of Bangui in Central African Republic. when the Catholic bishop, the Protestant pastor, and the imam of Bangui, when the country was suffering, let me say, an interfaith confrontation, and they started to tour the country, spreading a message of peaceful coexistence.
Mhm.
I believe that was really crucial to stop the fighting and to reduce the violence in the country. And then with the visit of Pope Francis in 2019, the situation improved a lot. I believe so. I think that also we have to be proud to be believers, to be Christians, and also to play an important role in reducing the violences related to religious affiliation that are exploited by politicians to fueling some conflicts. Just to add something what Joseph was saying.
Yes, I think that's really helpful because I do want to turn to not only the interreligious dialogue and having the representatives or local representatives of different religious organizations, but that brings me specifically to the local level. And oftentimes peace agreements fail. Obviously, implementation is critical, but they fail in the implementation because they're often seen as very elite compacts. We know certainly in the case of South Sudan, for instance, many attempts at peace agreements always at the high level. And of course, you have to have the buy-in of the people who are at least representing the government. But many of you work with trying very hard to bring in the local communities. So I want to start with you, Monsignor. How does the role of the church help with getting the local communities involved? And does the structure of the Catholic Church, which is quite unique with dioceses, which differs from other sects, other Christian sects, and even to a certain extent from the Muslim faith, does that help? Because then you have in a sense, an automatic outreach, but you still might be leaving people out. Could you speak to that, Monsignor Héctor?
Thank you. Well, in Colombia, we have a very good experience. The institutions have been set up during the negotiation with FARC, which are in one hand, we have the National Peace Council, so a council for peace, reconciliation, and coexistence. And at the same time, we have at the different levels of the society, I mean, regional and local levels, we have that councils. And in the councils must be represented the Catholic Church, because this is a very strong Catholic country, but we have on the other hand the different other religions being represented also according to the law. Some weeks ago, I visited a region not very far from Bogota, where the priest is a president of the local council, and the vice president is a pastor of evangelical church. So, I mean, it's important the cooperation among different religions. We have a conversation with the Jews, Muslims, etc. here in Colombia, and that is very important. Also because during the implementation, you have to deal with the spoilers. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, you have spoilers within the religious leaders. You have people who want to stop the implementation or to change everything, or are very critical and doesn't think about what means peace in a deep way. So we have that. That's one of the challenges we have. And on the other hand, you know, is in many cases you have fake news, etc., about the implementation, and you have to deal with that. and the narratives of hate. I mean, many people start to think about the peace not as a very deep and important goal for all of us, but they feel threatened by issues like justice, etc. Finally, I will say that spiritualities in general play a very important role. During the negotiation in Havana, when the victims were invited to speak in front of the table, the Bishop Conference, the Catholic Bishop Conference, had the opportunity to send our representatives there, and that was important to have a special sessions to introduce and to end the sessions with a spiritual component. That was very important. And after the negotiation, during the implementation, the issue of reconciliation and forgiveness is more and more important every day. It's taking more importance every day. I think after the signing the peace accord, one of the main issues is the polarization, is the fragmentation of the society, and you have to deal with that for a long term. And that is impossible for the state to do that. For example, the issue of forgiveness, and it's in the hands of the spiritual leaders, the religious leaders, to promote forgiveness and to accompany the local communities in there, because that is not at the top of the society. At the top of the society, we can get together. It's not so difficult, but at the grassroots level, it's more and more difficult. The people feel, in many cases, wounded.
Yes.
And it's very important to promote reconciliation at that level, and also to look out for solutions, and also to heal the traumas that the people have at the local level.
Well, this is a great, talking about healing and reconciliation, which is also a link to justice. Some of the questions that have been posed, how can the church use this role, use its leadership, use all of the resources to effectively address armed conflict, which, as the questioner Cesar Villanueva has asked, how have churches in the world effectively addressed an armed conflict, which is basically class-based in nature and not an identity-based conflict? Maybe I can turn to, well, would any of you like to dive into that? Because all of you are involved in these issues. So maybe Myla?
Actually, in the Philippines, we also deal with more ideology, class-based conflicts. So there are many conflicts in the Philippines. So we are dealing with now negotiate peace process with the Communist Party of the Philippines, and precisely we're talking about issues of marginalization and also justice concerns. So again, in that process, there is actually a platform whereby Catholic, Protestant, and ecumenical religious leaders, church leaders work together to ensure that we actually create visibility and also pressure government to continue with the negotiations. And that is part of the advocacy that is being done. But in the other side, also going back to the importance of bringing it down to the grassroots level, church communities, church leaders are acting as sanctuaries, because oftentimes you deal with violent conflicts between the military and the non-state actors. So the church becomes that sanctuary, becomes the protector of communities, becomes the haven of communities, but ensuring that that role of being an advocate, advocating for the communities, advocating to government, advocating to the other side. So it's a continuing process of engagement And it's not just negotiating and advocating too, but empowerment and own engagement of the communities themselves. So a key part of that is really building the awareness and capacities so that they themselves become engaged in that process.
So when we talk about implementation at the local level, Monsignor started with communication being so key. And he even mentioned fake news. How do you spread the word in the local communities? And how do you make sure that people in the territories, in the far reaches, either know about the agreement or are built into, because there may not be some formal agreement, but we're trying to build peace. How do you get the local people involved? Maybe I could ask Bishop Jean-Martin.
Thank you. Can I have somebody to translate in English? My English is last. Maybe I want to speak in French. I don't know. Okay.
No problem.
No problem. Thank you. Oui, dans chaque diocèse de Congo démocratique, nous avons la commission justice et paix. Et nous avons deux grandes situations au pays. À l'est, c'est beaucoup plus avec le groupe armé, tandis qu'à l'ouest, c'est aussi avec l'accompagnement des hommes de politique. Parce que le siège des pays, la capitale est au Congo. Alors, nous accompagnons les agents politiques parce que la démocratie est encore trop jeune au Congo. C'est une jeune démocratie, very young. Alors, il se fait que les gens doivent comprendre ce que signifie l'implantation, la construction de la paix. Quand je suis dans l'opposition, je suis au pouvoir, on n'est pas des ennemis, on est des frères, des sœurs, on n'est pas des ennemis. Alors, depuis que la conférence des évêques a essayé de mettre tous les protagonistes autour de la table pour qu'il y ait une transition en paix, la politique, les hommes pensent que l'Église catholique est la voie pour accéder au pouvoir. Donc, comme ceux qui étaient au pouvoir sont maintenant dans l'opposition et qui critiquaient l'Église, ils sont devenus très frères à nous, très proches. Et c'est ainsi qu'on leur apprend l'Évangile. On prêche l'Évangile de la paix. Heureux les artisans de paix. Ça ne sert à rien de détruire. Ça ne sert à rien de se battre physiquement ou par la violence. Mais par le dialogue, on peut construire la paix. Et cette jeune démocratie nécessite un accompagnement plus proche et un accompagnement quotidien des hommes politiques d'aujourd'hui. Voilà ce que je peux ajouter à cette grande préoccupation.
Thank you very much, Bishop. This is helpful to speak about a young democracy and the need for accompaniment. And that is running through the comments of all of you, is the need to accompany the people, not just the leaders, not just the political parties and the politicians at the high level, but the population and the people. And as Myla even mentioned, oftentimes you get additional conflicts that develop even as you resolve one issue, maybe through a formal peace process, other things come up. Or a peace process might lay out a process for handling, as Myla mentioned, the land distribution issues, land rights. But could you speak more about how you really engage the local populations? How does the church leaders or people working for the church let's say writ large, all of you, how do you make sure that peace building is in fact inclusive? Because in countries where there is conflict, oftentimes the third parties cannot get to the regions, either because of danger or difficulty in reaching them, lack of land or transportation, etc. So how do you involve and include local populations? I know Paolo wanted to speak, so let me ask him, and then I will turn back to the others.
Thank you very much. I will be very brief. Let me give you the example in South Sudan example. Before starting the mediation in which we are, facilitating the political dialogue between the government and then the groups that did not sign the revitalized peace agreement, the last peace agreement in the country.
Paolo, let me just stop you for 1 second, because
yeah,
I think obviously we're not expecting everyone to know all of the details of the conflicts that you all are involved in helping to solve. But in South Sudan in particular, Sant'Egidio is leading a process that is separate but accompanies the formal peace process that was negotiated by IGAD, the regional body of the Horn of Africa. But you are involved with the political actors that did not sign that main peace agreement. So this is kind of a key element in terms of how you are responding, that people might think that this is part of, well, you're just doing more of peace building of the people who've already signed. So could you maybe just focus a little bit on how did you get involved in this effort to bring in those who, for whatever reason, chose not to sign that peace agreement?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the clarification. It's a long story of friendship. First of all, the first visit of the late Dr. John Garang, the founding father of South Sudan, to Sant'Egidio dates back to 1994. So it's a long story of friendship between the community of Sant'Egidio and South Sudan. At that time, Southern Sudan was not yet independent. Independence arrived in 2011. More recently, as you are all aware, Pope Francis took the lead to boost the peace process in South Sudan. In 2018, an agreement was signed by the two main parties and belligerents, let me say, and Pope Francis called for a spiritual retreat in the Vatican in 2019, convening this spiritual retreat in which the two leaders took part. And of course, Pope Francis did prophetical gesture, kneeling and kissing the feet of the leaders and asking them to bring peace and stability to South Sudan. Sant'Egidio was already engaging with some of the groups that did not sign the 2018 peace agreement. And then we submitted President Salva Kiir the possibility to open a channel of communication to facilitate the political dialogue with the parties that were not part of this agreement. The idea was to have a more inclusive peace process, bringing together also the groups that were left out of the peace agreement, but that represent important part of the country. So that's why we, independently from the Holy Father, we started the process, and then also in connection with the Holy Father, and we are cooperating. As you said, it's our process, Rome Initiative, the so-called Rome Initiative is complementary to the peace agreement. The peace agreement was signed and is implemented. Those law is implemented, and Sant'Egidio is facilitating this political dialogue. And coming back to what we were saying, how to spread, how to involve, how to have a bottom-up approach. Because of course, in South Sudan, elites are so important. They are playing a really important role. And they, let me say, they don't care too much about the population. I don't want to say that the population is completely neglected, but there are dynamics that sometimes forget about the civilians. So the Sant'Egidio decided to have a close connection with the South Sudan Council of Churches. That is an ecumenical body, a South Sudanese ecumenical body, quite important. And through them, we are able to spread what we do in Rome, in all the country, all over the country, in all the parishes. And in their headquarters in Juba, we regularly meet with the civil society representatives, so that our process that could be perceived a process at a political level, at the elite level, is not only a political, an high-level process. Is a process in which the civil society, but also the church, this ecumenical body, can play an important role. Spreading the outcome and the achievement of our initiative, but also it's a way for us for a feedback about the process, about the mood and the feelings of people all over South Sudan.
Okay, so let me ask Myla as well first, just to add a little bit in terms of the local action on the ground. And then I want to turn to Monsignor to address a slightly different aspect of accompaniment.
Thank you, Susan. I am really passionate about this question because I am a grassroots peace builder. And so in our approach, we actually adopt what we call the rice cake approach or the bibingka approach. It's really simultaneous, bottom-up, top-down engagement. And
I like that rice cake approach.
Yes, the rice cake approach. And so that's simultaneous. So one of the early approach that we did when this peace process that Josefina alluded to, and even Paolo, this started in the late 90s. So during that time, what we did was actually to engage the broader public, Muslim, Christian, and indigenous, to actually build that peace constituency so that the communities themselves become the support to move towards the peace negotiations. So a key strategy that we did together with not just CRS, but other Muslim and indigenous non-government organizations.
So it becomes a demand. It's sort of demand driven by the population.
Yeah. And so the approach was actually to conduct in many communities the culture of peace workshop, where we talk about the history, where it started, history of conflict, what are alternative ways that address or rewrite the narrative of violence towards a narrative of collaboration, and to build that vision of peace in the community. So we ran that in many communities. So it became the impetus for actually ownership of communities in this peace process engagement. And so that was also partnered with the attempt to structure that and systematize that by working on establishing peace building structures in the community. And our inspiration for that is actually the Bishops' Ulama Forum, where our ulama and our Catholic and Protestant bishops actually established this interreligious forum. And so that became symbolic of the faith communities to work together. And so it's really important to establish the mechanisms and structures so that we are able to follow through the visions of peace. And thirdly, it's importantly to actually expand the peace table, expand the negotiations. So if we are not actually able to participate, then the process of the civil society groups, of course, with the leadership of the church leaders, is to be able to actually initiate and convene spaces where we talk about issues that are being talked about in the peace negotiation. So that becomes a process of public information, or even a way of public consultation, so that they're able to input and build that in a way space for people to engage across the different sectors, across the different actors in the society. So the vertical and social engagement through the rice cake approach.
That's great. Let me ask Monsignor Héctor, when you started, you mentioned how important communication is and the need to make sure that people are informed. But you also connected that to reconciliation, to justice. How do you, as church leaders, again, formal or informal, whether it's with your the interreligious fora or not, when peace processes falter, or when you get a new leader, for instance, in the new Marcos regime, who is claiming, no, we're not going to negotiate with the communists. How do you restart a peace process, or even begin one? So as Myla mentioned, you can have the rice cake approach, demand driven. I mean, the people always want peace, but how do you then insist that a government actually gets on with a process?
Well, in our experience, we have a previous step, which is the listening, active listening. We discovered that we must train, give training to the local priests, etc., pastors, to listen the local communities and to really understand what the communities are saying, what are their aspirations, etc. So that is important, because in many cases we have solutions, we have many ways to do different issues, to deal with different issues, but we do not listen carefully what the people say, what they are, how they feel the situation, how they see their role to contribute to the peace process. And that is important when we have a crisis in the process. Okay. Here in Colombia, we have several times different crises. During the negotiation process, it was very hard, and in many situations it was difficult to promote, to continue the negotiations, etc. And the voices of the regions have been very strong. Nowadays, for example, we are in preparation probably for a new process with the ELN, National Liberation Army. And the focus will be on the suffering, on the humanitarian impact of the local communities. And we must try to engage really all of them into a long-term conversation. And the first step we did was, as I said, listening, trying to understand very well what they need, etc. Their feelings. The feelings are quite important here. Mm-hmm. The perceptions they have, they weigh a lot. The perception the people have about the state, the role of the army, etc. That is important. The second step was to try to build with them a common project. To say, well, we are living in a region, we are part of the same human family, and this is a big house for everyone, and we must live together here. That has been very important to have that conversation. And then is to try to discover really what are the actors in each of the territories. Because in some cases you think it's just the army, just the guerrillas, and on the other hand, the local community like a big stone, like a big body. No, mm-hmm. They are not so united. They are not in that situation. Differences are important. Differences play a very important role when you have a negotiation. In the case of the As I said, the new process we will have in the future with the National Liberation Army, one of the issues, more important issues, the participation of the civil society. I mean, we learned during the process with FARC that we must promote more the participation of the society, not just to have big forum about the different points of the negotiation, but to really engage the people, giving ideas, giving projects, trying to define more clearly what kind of regions they are looking for, how they contribute to a peace process at the local level. So I will stress just that points, starting with the listening, which is, in my opinion, a very, very key issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So Monsignor mentioned the need for active listening. And we know that in the pulpits around the world, priests, pastors, imams, they have a captive audience at whatever level they are at. How do you all as peace builders try to make sure that those people who are talking to the public on their religious day and every day, that they are actually communicating the right messages? In my own experience as a diplomat, I have gone to so many religious ceremonies and heard the most shocking things come out of the mouths of religious men and women. How do you work at the local level to make sure that they stay on message, if you will? Okay, maybe Bishop Jean-Bertin?
Oui, thank you. Oh, en ce qui nous concerne, nous avons travaillé ensemble dans le cadre de l'écuménisme avec les autres religions. Toutes les religions, on a eu une plateforme avec laquelle on a travaillé ensemble, mais ils nous ont roulé 2 fois. C'est-à-dire qu'à l'approche de loi électorale pour les candidats qui doivent être présidents de la Commission électorale nationale indépendante, les autres églises reçoivent l'argent du gouvernement pour mettre quelqu'un qui est avec le gouvernement. Or, quand on va là-bas, nous sommes en minorité. Cette loi-là fait que on va passer par élection et l'Église catholique ou l'Église protestante, on n'a que 2 voix et les autres églises qui sont 6, ils ont plus de voix. Or, des fois, les personnes qui indiquent ne remplissent pas les critères de ce qu'il faut faire. C'est ainsi que en deux reprises, ils nous ont roulé. Alors, nous avons dit, nous, on continue à travailler avec l'Église protestante en matière de préparation et formation des gens pour les élections. Tandis que pour les autres matières de dialogue écuménique, bon, sur le terrain, nous travaillons ensemble. Mais en rapport avec les élections, là, nous ne sommes plus d'accord à cause de la corruption qui gangrène ces églises de réveil. Et ils viennent déjà corrompus. Et ils veulent faire des lois avec la corruption. Et là, nous disons, ça ne marche pas avec la proclamation de la bonne nouvelle. Wow.
So in the case of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you are working ecumenically across the borders to also work on not just peace processes, but in your case, elections, and trying to help countries understand, the people understand that you cannot have corruption in the church and also then take that forward as leaders. But let me ask 2 separate questions. So one comes from an audience question about peacekeeping operations. So we know the role of the church in peace implementation, in helping and accompanying the populations in implementing peace agreements. Is there anything more that peace operations in countries could do? And for instance, there's a peacekeeping mission, a UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. There's a UN peacekeeping mission in the DR Congo. Is there something more that peace processes or peacekeeping operations could do beyond just stopping violence or being sort of the formal peacekeepers that would help with peace building?
Yeah, may I?
Please.
Let me say some few words on the cooperation, let me say, very deep and deeply rooted cooperation that Sant'Egidio is having in South Sudan with the United Nations mission there and structure. It's a way to share information, but also, for example, you know that UN has a lot of people on the ground, and for us it's important to reach people that it is difficult for us to reach. It means that creating connection and also to cooperate in spreading what is going on at the political level. So it's important to the cooperation between the United Nations mission and also our efforts in peace building. Second point, I would like to say something about Central African Republic. Sant'Egidio was involved in negotiating some agreement in Central African Republic, and then was involved in the disarmament project. And together with the UN, we went with our local staff and also staff from Rome in different villages to disarm people voluntarily.
To disarm people. So yeah. Sant'Egidio with the peace.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Ahead, sorry.
No.
Yeah.
So I like the concrete example.
We were not allowed to collect weapons from the rebels group, but UN is allowed. UN staff, they are allowed to do something like that. Our role was to create an environment, a conducive environment for these rebels to give up their weapons to the UN staff. And we were there not only to create a conducive environment, but also to support these ex-rebel, let me say, with giving them some tools to cultivate, to going back to their normal life, the possibility for them to open a little shop in their villages. So to create the possibility for them, to give them the possibility to come back to the civilians' way of life they were used to. And then they became rebels because of need of food and other things in a difficult situation. That's why the cooperation was really very good. And is still really very good in Central African Republic. Sant'Egidio can reach some groups that is maybe not easy for UN to reach, create the environment for them to disarm, but we need UN staff to collect weapons, of course.
Okay, so that's something that if it's already built into the UN mandate, the peacekeeping mandate, that Sant'Egidio and other peace builders on the ground could help and accompany. That's a good concrete example of accompaniment. Let me ask Josefina, when we talk about civil society, and as the overall coordinator of PAM, when you look at peace processes and we talk about civil society, how do we know that this civil society organization is real, is legitimate, because we know that governments also create their own civil societies as a buffer, perhaps. Is there a way to tell, or is that just something, you have to deal with?
Yes, well, I think that this is why it's so important to always have an approach, as you were talking before, that is that looks at peace building also as an embedded process within that has already dynamics that whichever war there is, there have always been people resisting, people cooperating, collaborating. You always find these sanctuaries, you always find different non-violent ways of resistance. And I think that once you start a more formal peace accord or a more formal peace agreement and you start the phase of implementation, the most logical thing to do is to identify these peace infrastructures and work through them. So I think that knowing the context, knowing the history of the conflict is very important, as many of us work either in international components of verification or a part of the international community. I think it's always important to make sure that we are in conversation with local peace builders. One of the things that we do around the world is always try to find those actors, those organizations that can also provide us with information about who is actually behind the civil society organizations, how legitimate they can be in the eyes of others too. And I think that for that, doing a serious mapping of the conflict before engaging or while we're engaging with different actors on the ground is quite important. And I think that as universities, we also have the great opportunity and the great chance of taking a step back and trying to analyze the conflict, being very conscious that most of the time we are seen as international actors, and we want to make sure that we contribute in a very positive way to peace building efforts on the ground.
Myla, would you like to add to that?
I totally agree, Susan, with Josefina, that it's important to recognize for any international actors to provide support and accompaniment to the peace process. And we do have that mechanism in the Bangsamoro peace process. We have the international monitoring team. We have the international community providing support. And a key part of what has actually happened in terms of success is really the recognition of the local peace building actors. So, and there's actually an ongoing advocacy on the side of the local actors to be recognized and to actually, in a sense, advocate to those who are helping, that to actually leverage on what is already there on the ground, because as it's really important that those who are there, in terms of they're embedded, they understand the context, although they're not always neutral, because we do have our own interest also in relation to our identities, but really to make sure that there's a balancing in that process. And we're very lucky. For example, for CRS, we're a part of the peace process mechanism. We're part of the civilian protection component of the peace process mechanism. So there are already attempts actually to integrate civil society groups. One of our friends in the civilian protection component also was recently recognized to actually play a key role in the Joint Normalization Committee, which is one of the key aspects of the peace agreement. And then our hope also is to be able to bring the peace accords matrix to Mindanao to actually complement what is actually a gap in terms of assessing through research and evidence-based processes by way of PAM as a tool to understand the progress of the implementation. And we're actually trying to gain headways in that, but again, always in collaboration with other civil society groups that have long accompanied the peace process since the late 90s.
That's great. Well, as we wind down, I want to ask our bishops, so Monsignor and Bishop Jean-Martin, what role how do bishops feel? And maybe that's too broad because I don't want to put you in the position of having to answer for all bishops, but how do you feel being involved in peace processes, which some might think of as being, as the church playing kind of a substitute political role, whether it's in peace processes, peace agreements, or in the case of the DRC, electoral politics in a way. How does that role make you all feel? What is that, a substitute for political leadership, or is that something so distinctive that really only the church or other religious leaders can, a role that they can play? Let me start with you, Monsignor.
Thank you. In my opinion, playing a role in a peace process is always a political issue, because the negotiations are related to very, very concrete political goals, etc. But the role of the church here in Colombia has been focused on trying to accompany and trying to raise the voice of the victims, to give them the opportunity to put on the table their voice. In that sense, it's not really a substitute of the political actors, but it's complementary. It's to try to push forward to the negotiation to get us a real solution for the poorest people and for the most vulnerable, the victims, etc. People, for people who have difficulties to be listened. I want to put an example. Here in Colombia, we have in the Pacific Coast a big Afro-Colombian population, Afro-descendants. And during the negotiation with FARC, there will not be a clear definition about how to include the ethnic component in the negotiation. And the different dioceses in that region, in the Pacific Coast, worked very hard with the local organizations, with the community organizations, until the end, when they have a very good document. They went to the Havana for the negotiation. They bring the document to show their position and how they were affected in a particular way, in a different way by the armed conflict, and how they suffer in a very, very concrete way, different than the other regions. And that was amazing, because at the end, the negotiation, they decided to include an ethnic chapter for in the negotiation. That is a cross-cutting issue at the moment.
That's interesting. So did the church play a role in helping, well, maybe not even helping the community, that particular community, in developing their, or bringing it to the formal process?
Yes, the church built the bridges. First of all, accompany them to have a very good proposal, a very good position regarding the ethnic, how to include the ethnic dimension in the negotiation, in the agreement. And afterward, they accompany, the bishop accompany, etc., build bridges, etc. But the main, probably the most important contribution was to accompany, to encourage, to give contributions to the local Afro-Colombian communities to reflect and to write a concrete document on their suffering, on also on how to deal with that, with the Afro-Colombian communities and the indigenous communities after the negotiation, how to include that. That was very important, and in my opinion, that is part of the specific role. As I said at the beginning, it's always a political role, but at the end of the day, it's always also very related to ethic. It's very related to the way we see the common good, I think that is very important. It's everything focused on the good of the whole nation.
That's great. So let me just turn lastly to Bishop Jean-Martin, just very briefly.
Yeah, thank you. Je pense que l'évêque ou l'Église ne se substitue pas à l'État. Je sais que l'Église ici au Congo, des évêques, on prêche que heureux les artisans de paix. Alors, il y a l'accent qui est mis sur la réconciliation. Et à propos de la réconciliation, il y a aussi l'aspect que le gouvernement doit stopper ce qui est de la corruption, lutte contre la corruption et lutte aussi pour le droit de l'homme. L'aspect du droit de l'homme est très important dans un pays comme le nôtre. Et aussi les ressources naturelles, qui est la cause principale presque de toutes ces guerres, des seigneurs de guerre à l'est du pays, à Ituri, au nord Kivu et au sud Kivu, la ressource naturelle qui devait être répartie de façon équitable pour le développement du pays. Et on est étonné que la Colombie et le Congo, c'est presque sur la même ligne. Et ce qui est des ressources naturelles, le coltan est à 80% au Congo et 20% en Colombie. Et tous ces pays ne sont jamais stables. Alors, il y a aussi le respect de la démocratie. Et en fait, les évêques prêchent pour des élections transparentes. Des élections transparentes. Voilà un peu en résumé ces 6 points que je peux dire que l'Église ne se substitue pas à l'État, mais prêche les valeurs. Ce sont des valeurs évangéliques pour la croissance d'un pays vers la transparence et vers la démocratie.
Well, thank you very much. I know that we are at the end. I see some very interesting questions that popped up at the very end. But I just want to say that I know that this panel has focused on peace processes in other countries, but I would like to just mention that I know that the Catholic communities, obviously not just bishops, are working on peace building right here in the United States as well. But this, of course, is an international conference. Maybe there will be another opportunity to address peace building in countries that we have not touched upon. But I want to thank all of our panelists for making the time to be with us, for sharing your thoughts and sharing your experiences with all of our audience around the world, and praise you for all that you are doing to try to make the world a more peaceful place, and the focus and the importance on reconciliation, peace building, and justice. Thank you again very much, and have a great rest of your day or evening wherever you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
For your moderation.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So,